Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar with Erica Robinson. We're going to give it a few minutes. It's a few minutes before the hour, a couple minutes before the hour now, just to get everybody situated. And as always, this webinar will be recorded and you will get a follow-up link in a day or so. Hi, Joe from Orlando. Oh, my home state. Hello. Hi, Lester. Hi, Philly. Alice from Philly. Hello. How's everyone doing? Is anyone, I hope everyone's okay from in Texas with all they're out over there. Oh, hi, Ivis. Oh, you have someone comment, Jerry Moore. Yes, Jerry is my, I call him my pool coach. For those of you know, he is my pool coach. Not right now, obviously, but when we are back, I will be shooting some pool with him. Hello. What's that?
I'm surprised you don't have a pool table in your house yet.
No, of course not. Trying to get Armando to let me come over and practice on his table. Armando's got a pool table. Hello, Colorado, Texas. Oh, wow, Texas. I guess you're not in the part where you're out of the power grid. Costa Mesa, hello, right down the street, almost an hour. Hi, Richard. I'm glad you found the teleconverter. Yes. Yeah, I think I spoke to you last week about the Bergen County camera, but you found one at your local store. That's awesome. And let's see, Chicago. Hello, snowy Chicago. Yes, I have some of my friends. I used to live in the Midwest, and in Indianapolis, they got some snow there. Indiana. Oh, hi. Yes, I used to live in Indianapolis. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. You are in for a treat this evening. Erica is one of the great photographers on our team here. You're into.
I don't know. I'm learning from all these guys. It was all the years of Armando putting up with me on the road that really did. So.
No, you definitely have. You have your own little style, your little travel photography. I love night photography. I'm not a night shooter, so definitely learned something there.
One of my favorites ever was the time that Armando and I were in Yellowstone. I don't know if you remember that, but it was my first time in Yellowstone ever. This was 5 years ago almost now.
And that was my first time there too.
Last night. What's that?
That was my first time there too.
Oh, I didn't know that. That was a great spot.
All right, so thank you everybody for joining us. Want to get started right quick here, and as always, feel free to type your questions up right here as that you're chatting with us right now. We see everything, and if we don't reply right away, we're trying to get to everybody. And questions for Erica, we will try to hold off most of them till the end, but if it's something that's pertaining to an image that she's speaking to, I'll try to bump in and ask her right away. But we want to try to get to let her finish her talks, because sometimes she might be covering something that's going to answer your question anyway. So, and let's see. Hi, oh hi, Gail. Welcome back. Okay, looks like everyone's good to go. Without further ado, I think I will share make you the presenter. You'll see it pop up right here, Erica. Got it?
Yes. Let's see. All right. Janet, can you see that okay?
Yep. Just got to press a play and then it will go full screen.
How'd that go?
I think I'm seeing a delay. Armando, do you see it? Did it play?
No, it hasn't gone to play yet.
Okay.
The arrow is frozen.
Showing pause keynote. Let's see. Good old technology, huh? Should be going through. I hit share. I'll try it again.
There we go.
There you
How's
go.
that?
Yep.
Good to go? All right, great. Just a little bit of
Yeah.
a delay.
Yeah. Sorry if you guys, I don't know why we're experiencing some internet connection delay. So if you're experiencing that, don't worry. I believe everything should be recorded just fine if you get the link, and everything will be up and ready for you. But yeah, so without further ado, I will hand it over to Erica. Enjoy the webinar, and we will see you at the end.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. Thank you everybody for being with me tonight. I know I say this in all of my webinars, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but I am truly glad that you are with me online tonight because that means that you are still out there safe and that you're still practicing your social distancing, because I do want to see you when we get back on the road, hopefully soon in the future. So I do appreciate you guys all being with me tonight. I know I mentioned earlier, hoping everyone in Texas is doing okay. So sending a giant warm hug from California out there to all my Texas friends. Hopefully you guys are staying nice and warm. But yeah, so tonight we are going to talk about the mysteries of night photography. And this is probably one of my favorite topics to talk about because I truly love spending time outside at night photographing, particularly the night sky. So with everything though, I do hope that throughout this presentation, you at least are inspired. So even if you just get one thing, I hope that you get more, of course. And I know I'm probably repeating myself if you've heard my other presentations in the past, but I truly hope that you're inspired to photograph more, that you're inspired to photograph something new. Try, if you've never tried night photography before, maybe this is your first stepping stone to it. So I do hope that this inspires you to photograph. But what I wanted to kind of talk about first is thinking about why we photograph what we photograph. In a lot of my webinars, I like to talk about the particular genre that we are photographing and why we enjoy it so much, right? Because photography is still an art, and oftentimes we forget that, and we still have to be passionate about what we do within our photography to really kind of go further with it, right? So why do we photograph the night sky? And I want you guys to think about that. For me, it's a lot of the research. It's a lot of the feeling like I'm on a mission to photograph something in particular, right? And when I think about photographing a place during the day, like of course you see in this image here, it completely shines later on at night. We see a completely different world come alive at night in that same space. So the image that I just showed a moment ago was in Yellowstone National Park, and this is the exact same spot, just 12 hours later in the evening. I actually photographed this with Armando. This was like 5 years ago. This is one of my favorite night photography shoots of all time. It was one of the clearest I've ever seen the Milky Way, but I digress. One of the reasons that I love photographing the night sky is because of this other world that we see, is because of these colors and something so different that's offered later in the evening that we don't see during the day. We also can't forget about our cityscapes. So we can't forget about how things change in the evenings for our cities as well. The movement changes, the light changes, the overall atmosphere of our cities completely change in the evenings. So while this is going to be a lot of a talk about photographing, particularly the night sky, we are of course going to have some images of the city as well. So don't feel left out if you are a cityscape shooter, because all of this information still pertains, okay? So before we jump into the particular night sky tips, I do always want to make sure that everyone is on the same page with our techniques, with our understanding of our camera, because I think that that's really important, particularly in night sky photography, almost when we are trying to trick the camera in a sense, right? We are trying to use our camera in a really extreme manner to try and get as much light onto our sensor as possible, right? So I do want to take a step back just for a minute and talk about the basics of exposure within our photography to make sure we're all on the same page. So if you are a pro with your camera, this is just going to be a little bit of a refresher. And if you are new to your SLR, hopefully this will give you some tips before we jump into the night sky stuff. So all of us in our SLRs should have the 4 main pieces up there on our dial: M, A, S, or T, and P. And those are manual, aperture priority, shutter priority, and program, okay? Now, I did have someone way back in the day when I first started teaching tell me that he could photograph everything in auto mode, that I could photograph in manual mode, but it would take me 10 times longer and we would get the same image. And no, that is not exactly how this works at all. What I want to be doing in manual mode, I want to be in control of all the pieces within my camera. I want to be in control of my depth of field. I want to be in control of my shutter speed, how fast or how slow I am showing a subject, right? I want to be in control of my ISO, how much light I'm letting onto my sensor. So while we don't necessarily have to be in manual all the time, it is a great idea to get out of that green mode, which Armando likes to dub the green mode of death. So we will stay out of that mode as best as we can because we want to be more in control of the different aspects of our camera. So first, in the basics of exposure, we think about our aperture. And our aperture does two very important things. Our aperture, for one, controls how much light we are letting into our camera through our lens. So if I'm looking at f2.8, f2, f1.4, those lower numbers, we're opening up our aperture and we are letting in a whole lot more light. Whereas if I'm looking at f11, f16, f22, that hole inside of our lens is closing. We are letting in less light. What we are also doing with our aperture is controlling our depth of field. So how deep or how shallow our depth of field is. So if I am photographing a portrait, for example, and I want to make sure that I have that beautiful bokeh in the background, that's generally when you're seeing people drop down their aperture a bit, and they're opening up that lens to make sure that they're controlling and creating a more shallow depth of field. So just a quick example here, kind of pertaining to both of those things, both letting in a whole lot of light, this was shot at f2.8, as well as creating a more shallow depth of field. So really making sure that that statue in the front was the main focus and everything in the background was blurred out. All right, so now that we are all pros on our aperture, we're going to talk just a second about shutter speed. So our shutter speed, when we get behind our camera and we see all of these buttons and numbers, our shutter speed, we really just have to ask ourselves one simple question. Do I want to stop motion or do I want to show motion, right? So if I want to freeze action, if I want to freeze a car going down the street, I want to be using a faster shutter speed to make sure that I'm freezing that motion. But if I want to show that motion, if I want to show the motion of water running through a waterfall, right? I want to slow down that shutter speed to make sure that I am showing that motion, right? So just a couple of examples with that here. I know this isn't a nighttime image. We're going to get to that in just a second. But just for example purposes, if I want to freeze the motion in this frame, this was actually shot at a 2,000th of a second to make sure that I was really freezing that fishing line. Because if I went too slow of a shutter speed, I probably would have seen, I would have lost his whole arm or at least the fishing line because it was moving so quickly. So I wanted to make sure that I froze that motion. On the other end of that spectrum, if I want to show that motion, just like I was talking about with the water moving through like a waterfall, if I want to show that motion kind of moving through my frame, I need a slower shutter speed. This was shot at a 15th of a second to make sure that I was really showing the motion of that sand in this particular image. Now, what our shutter speed also does is control, again, how much light is coming into my camera, right, onto my sensor. So just like aperture through the lens particularly controls how much light is coming through, my shutter speed, the longer my shutter is open, the more light is going to come in. The shorter my shutter is open, the less light is going to come in, right? So I have an example here of just a couple of images that we're going to run through, starting at 1.6 seconds. Nothing else in this image changed, so you can see the f-stop, the aperture on the top left. That stayed at f16. My ISO stayed the same the whole time. The only thing I did was change the shutter speed, so how long my shutter was open. And we can see the difference in how much light was coming through just with that shutter speed. So starting here with 1.6 seconds, 13 seconds, 15 seconds, and 20 seconds. Okay, now that is while 20 seconds doesn't seem like a whole lot of time in the grand scheme of things, 20 seconds really is a great deal of time, particularly within photography. It's a big difference from 20 seconds to 1.6 seconds, how much light we're going to see enter our frame. Okay. Now, last but not least, in our exposure triangle is, of course, our ISO. Now, ISO oftentimes is the last thing that we are thinking about, but it is just as important as the other two pieces. They need to kind of all equally be balanced and working together in order to create the images that we have in our minds, right? So when we shot film, we would grab a particular roll of speed film based on the amount of light that we had when we were photographing, right? So if we were out during the day, generally we shot at a lower ISO. So we would grab 100 roll speed film, right? Versus maybe later on in the afternoon, we would grab 800 or 1600 even, although typically we would see a whole lot of noise and a whole lot of grain on that film. We don't have to worry too much about that anymore because the digital sensor that's inside of our camera has gotten so much better over the years. Technology has just skyrocketed and we don't see noise at high ISO as much anymore. So what I mean by that is when we're thinking about our sensor is the digital chip that's inside of our camera. And with our ISO digitally now, we are trying to make our sensor more or less sensitive to light. Just like what we were doing with film, except we're not physically taking a roll of film and sticking it inside of our camera, right? So when we were out earlier in the day, we had a whole ton of light. Still the same idea, shooting at ISO 100 because we want to keep as much information on that sensor as possible and shoot as low as we can. Whereas later on in the afternoon, maybe I'm boosting that up to 800 because I need a bit more light to hit my sensor. Let's say maybe I'm hand holding right and I don't want my shutter speed to go too low, so I'm boosting up my ISO. That also happens. And then of course, later on in the evening, we may need, depending on how much moonlight is out, we may need to boost our ISO 1600, 3200, maybe even 6400, depending on what our cameras can do. Okay. So now that we have jumped out of that section, I want to talk real quickly about some lenses and some gear, and then we'll get into the night photography stuff. Okay. So I did want to make sure I put up a slide here of some lenses that I think are really helpful for our night sky photography in particular. So if you are a full frame shooter, I have a list there, the 15 to 30 2.8 being my favorite. I shoot with that lens all the time at night. I absolutely love what it can do. Yes, it is a physically larger lens, but it does have a great round element on the front that lets in a whole ton of light, and it keeps everything nice and straight on the edges. So that round element on the front does not make it fisheye. That round element on the front actually makes it rectilinear so that I don't have to worry about warping on the edges. Okay, so that one is one of my favorites. We also have a 17 to 35, 2.8 to 4. So if you're looking for something a little bit smaller, a little bit lighter than the 15 to 30, this is also an awesome lens, super wide at 17, and it's 2.8 at 17. So that's really what you need there. We can't forget about the 24 to 70 or even our 35s. So the 35 1.4 and the 35 1.8. While we may have to change up our equation just a bit, which we'll talk about in a moment, 35 can still be wide enough depending on what our composition is, right? If you're a crop frame shooter, the 10 to 24, which is a 3.5 to 4.5 lens, is awesome, super wide for our crop frame shooters out there. If you shoot full frame for Sony mirrorless, the 17 to 28 is one of my favorites. It's also a 2.8, so it lets in a whole ton of light. There's also the 28 to 75, a couple of primes, the 20 millimeter and the 35 millimeter. And then for the new Sony APS-C, we have the 17 to 70 2.8. So we definitely have a lot of options out there for you, the whole gamut of options there. So if you have questions on them, please feel free to ask and we'll check back in at the end. All right, so now I do of course want to jump into our night skies and thinking about really how we are going to kind of level up our images in a sense, how we are going to really step up our game for our night sky photography, and how we are going to create something unique from what we see in our minds. How can we put that onto film, right? So what I did was come up with 10 different tips, tricks, and techniques that I've been using outside when I photograph at night. And hopefully, if you haven't used these before, hopefully these will help you on your next shoot. So jumping right in, number one, we are going to talk about apps and how we research for our night skies. I personally think that research is like half the battle, or 90% of the battle even. It's a really big part of what we do when we photograph at night, because let's face it, everything is 10 times harder when we get out into the wild and we're trying to photograph at night. Nothing is where we left it. We can't see 10 feet in front of our face, right? So we really need to research the place that we are going to make sure everything is all set before we get out there. So a couple of apps here that I use almost religiously when I'm photographing at night, specifically Sky Guide and PhotoPills. Sky Guide is a wonderful app for when you are physically out in the place that you are already planning to photograph. So if you get out there at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and you want to see what that particular sky is going to look like at 10 o'clock at night, you can point your phone right up to the sky. You can fast forward your phone basically until 10 o'clock at night, and it will show you exactly what it's going to look like at that time. So you'll know where the Milky Way is going to be, you'll know where the North Star is going to be, and those are two important pieces for our night sky shoots. The other one is PhotoPills. So PhotoPills is every night sky photographer's guidebook, basically. It's a wonderful, wonderful app. I want to say it's like 10 bucks or 12 bucks now, but it is worth it if you photograph the night sky a lot. But it is a very deep app. There is a lot of information in this one app itself. So I would suggest jumping onto their YouTube page. You can connect through their website onto their YouTube page if you can't find it. And it will teach you how to use the app before getting out into your location to shoot. Because if you do what I did and just jump out into the wild and try to use it for the first time, it may not go so well because there is so much information in there. If you can use it right off the bat, I give you so much credit. There is just a lot of info in there, so I do recommend to jump onto their YouTube page. It will help you figure out how to set your position for photography before you even get to that location. So it will help you determine when the moon is going to set, when the moon is going to rise, when the sun is going to rise, because that is of course very important for us night sky shooters, where the angle of the Milky Way is going to come in. So we all know that, of course, with rotation of the Earth, we are going to see the Milky Way change in position, right? So while at the beginning of the year it's going to start off very low, eventually partway through the year we're going to see it straight up and down, and then it will kind of fall back over later on in the year. So it is all something that PhotoPills can help us with. Number two, let's think about when we want to photograph. And this is something that PhotoPills can help us with, but we need to consider what our sky is going to look like, what shades and colors it's going to give off. So this image in particular, I have 3 images that I'm going to show you from this same scene. I was shooting a time lapse there, so I was there for about 2.5 or 3 hours or so. But I noticed how different the sky was during just that short amount of time. 3 hours is a big difference in night sky time, right? So if I was there too late in the evening, it was too dark. It was too contrasty. So I had a very, very dark sky evening. It was new moon. There was no light out, which led for no separation between my background, my foreground, and all of the other information in between. It did look great in a black and white. I loved it there, but it was still it didn't have any depth to it. There was no separation between my background and my foreground. But when I was there earlier in the day, it was a beautiful day for portraits because we had this nice diffused light coming through the clouds. But as far as the cityscape goes, I didn't really have any of those nice white puffy clouds. I didn't have really any oomph to this image, right? There was nothing exciting for my viewer to look at. But if I was there kind of just right in the middle, kind of like the Goldilocks effect, this is our blue hour, right? This is something that PhotoPills can help us with, or even just checking our weather app on our phone. That can even tell us right after sunsets when our blue hour is going to be. And that will give us this nice indigo blue. It will create the separation that we need from our background to our foreground, and it will still allow me to do some nice longer exposures. So this was maybe only a 2 or 3 second exposure, but it still allowed for all that information to move through my frame. So we do need to consider what time when we are photographing. Number 3, considering our shutter speeds. So just like we talked about in the beginning when we talked about the basics of exposure, our shutter speed is really important to our night photography. We can control loads of things with our shutter speed. In this particular case, being at 15 seconds, we can control the amount of people that are wandering around our frame, right? So if I don't want to see the 30 or 40 people that are wandering around the Chicago Bean late at night, because if you've ever been there, you know that it doesn't matter if it's 2 in the afternoon or 2 in the morning, there are still loads of people walking around the Bean. It is a wonderful tourist spot. But if you want to kind of get some of those people out of your frame, by leaving our shutter open, those people walk right through our frame and we are not going to bother seeing them much. I did, however, in this particular image, leave that one gentleman under there, under the bean to help me with scale, to help my viewer understand really how big this space was. So you could fit a person under there, you could fit multiple people under there. Just helped my viewer with scale a little bit. Back to shutter speed here. Shutter speed is really important when we are thinking about the Milky Way exposure rule. So you are welcome to write this down. You're welcome to take a quick screenshot of this. You're welcome to take a picture with your phone, whatever you want to do. But this is a really great starting point if we are trying to photograph the Milky Way and pinpoint the stars. And I'll tell you what I mean by that in just a second. But if we look at this exposure rule, this is 500 divided by our focal length equals our exposure time. So it equals my shutter speed. So let's say I'm using our Tamron 15 to 30 millimeter lens. We see 500 divided by 15, which is my widest focal length, that equals 33 seconds. So we round that to about 30 seconds. But as we go down in that example there, we see 20 millimeters and 24 millimeters. The focal length, as my focal length zooms out, so if I'm at 24 millimeters, my shutter speed decreases. And that is because, again, with the rotation, we are going to see the stars move as we get physically closer to them. So no, I'm personally not getting closer to them, but if I'm at 24 millimeters, my focal length is getting closer to the stars. So that means if I don't want to see any movement in the stars, I can't have that long of a shutter speed. If I photograph at 30 seconds, I'm going to see a little bit of movement. I'm going to see a little tail on those stars. So a great starting point if you are trying to pinpoint the stars. What I mean by that is just so that we don't get that little tail, so that we don't get that bit of movement, try starting at f2.8 if your aperture allows, ISO 3200, and that's if you are on a new moon or you don't have a lot of moon that evening, and 30 seconds. And now that can change, that's never exact all the time, but it's a really great starting point so that when you do get into the field, you can start there and then kind of change up your equation as needed. Now with that, there's nothing wrong with creating longer exposures. There's nothing wrong with creating those little tails in the sky, right? So, and this is all, it's all personal preference for your particular style of photography. But a lot of times with night photography, I am starting my equation. So I'm thinking about my aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, but I'm thinking about my shutter speed first, right? So in this case, I wanted to see that whole car streak, right? I wanted to see that start from behind the rock and exit my frame on the left. I wanted to see that all in my frame. So what we did is we waited for one of the cars to go by and kind of timed it out. We timed it out to be about 3 minutes. And then I based my aperture and my ISO around that, right? So the other piece that I wanted was to make sure that I could create the starburst with the moon that was there. That was I think the midnight sun. So I wanted to make sure that I could create a little starburst instead of just have a kind of bright white orb in the middle of my frame. So that was at f16, 3 minute exposure. And then I based my ISO off of that. So we're breaking it down piece by piece now. And then of course we have those times where we want to create even longer exposures. We want to see more information. We want to see more of that star trail. What I do suggest in these instances is to start or go only as short as 45 minutes. If we go shorter than that, sometimes it looks like just a kind of like a little tiny tail on the star, and it almost looks like a mistake. Sometimes it'll look like a little bit of shutter shake. So my golden rule when I'm doing long exposures at night is to do only 45 minutes as the shortest. And I have done ones up to, this was 3 hours. I've done a 6-hour exposure at one point. But there are 2 ways to go about this. One way is to control the exposure and create the equation, doing it all in one exposure, all in one frame, leaving your shutter open for 3 hours, leaving your shutter open for 45 minutes. The other way to do this is by using a program called StarStax and doing a single exposure, so that one frame every 25 or 30 seconds for the 3-hour amount of time, or for the 45-minute amount of time, whichever you've chosen. Then once you put those into JPEGs and you merge them all together in StarStax, the program will keep them in a consecutive order so that you see the streaks through the sky.
Hey, Erica.
Yes.
Hey, sorry. I know this is a really interesting topic here. A lot of people are asking, does
Yes.
this formula apply to like APS-C, like the 500 rule?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And okay, cool. Does the ISO have to equal 3200 with the 500 rule?
Okay. So your focal length is going to affect it. So if you do the 1.5 or the 1.6 conversion and you end up at 24 millimeters, yes, that means you're not going to be able to have the full 30 seconds exposure. So maybe you're only at 20 seconds. And then I would base my ISO off of that, because that's going to be determined based on maybe how much moonlight we have out that night as well. So if we have a night that isn't new moon, let's say we do have like a half moon or a partial moon out that night, we may not need the full 3200 ISO. I've had nights where I only need 800, right? So I would start with my shutter speed and make sure that that is all set first, and then control my ISO after that.
Okay. And I know some people are asking about the apps. I know you mentioned PhotoPills, SkyGuide, and was there another one?
There was another one in there, Aurora. The only reason I didn't mention it, I like to put it up on the screen so that we have it as an option, but we're not seeing the Aurora in the US at the moment. But if you are in a location where the Aurora Borealis is an option, that is a great app to help you with the cloud coverage that's out at night. Because a lot of times, so I've been to Iceland quite a few times now, I've been to Norway quite a few times, and when I'm out there photographing for the Aurora Borealis, for the Northern Lights, there's a particular type of cloud that our naked eye cannot see through, but our camera can. So sometimes the Aurora app can help us understand the cloud coverage that's going to be out that night.
Gotcha. And one last question before we move on. Was it a how your battery life for a 3-hour use, a 3-hour exposure?
Yeah, good question. So I shoot this particular image was shot on a Nikon D4S, and those batteries are monsters. My battery, I think I've gotten 5 or 6 hours out of it before. But what you
Wow.
can do to combat that in most cameras is using a battery grip that has 2 batteries, so that
Right.
when one battery dies, it shifts over to the next, and you get double battery life.
All right, there's your answer, you guys. Everybody's asking
Yeah.
like 3-hour exposure, like how you go to the battery life?
That's a really great question. No, thank you for asking. I think that the double battery pack is your best way to go, and trying to keep your camera as warm as possible. So if you're out on a night that is pretty chilly or it's a windy night, make sure that you have kind of stuff around your camera, that there's a barrier so that the wind isn't just like whipping through your camera. Try and keep it as warm as possible. Because we all know, unfortunately, when batteries get a little chilly, they tend to die quicker. So,
Yes.
yeah.
There you have it. Thank you.
Quick
Oh,
comment,
yeah.
quick question,
Thanks,
actually. Someone wants to know, is this a stacked image?
This is using star stacks, yes. So this is doing 2 things, actually. This is doing star stacks and stacking my sky, right? So this was over a 3-hour period of time. I can't remember the number of frames that it was, but the sky in particular is stacked using star stacks. And then the foreground image is a separate composite. So the foreground image was exposed in the very beginning of me photographing. I exposed that one image just for the foreground to make sure that the foreground, so the tent and the rocks in the background there, to make sure that they were in focus and that they were exposed for properly. And then I'm also stacking the star stacks stacked image on top of it. Man, that's a tongue twister. Yeah.
I like it. Awesome. Cool. All right.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else I can help with before I jump into the next?
So far, so good. Other than, I think some people are asking about something about I saw the question about how do you prevent the star trails, or like if you're doing a long exposure, I'm trying to find that question now. Sorry, hold on.
It's all right.
I think I lost it. Unless you see it, Armando.
Is it the one that says, how do you do star trails with the shutter speed open for 45 minutes?
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so if I'm not stacking.
Right, if you're just doing one exposure, he wants to know.
Gotcha. Okay, so we then have to change up the equation, right? So if we are starting with the general equation of f2.8, where we're letting in a lot of light through our aperture, ISO 3200, where we're letting a lot of light within our ISO, and we're doing a 30-second shutter speed, right? Where we're letting light in through our shutter speed, we have to then change up the equation to base our shutter speed around 45 minutes and change up the other two. So maybe my ISO at that point is only going to be 100. Maybe my aperture can't be at f2.8, maybe my aperture is going to be at f4 or 5.6, depending on how much light we have that evening. So we have to change up that equation. But I still always start with my base equation of 3200 ISO, f2.8, and a shutter speed of 30 seconds. I see where that's at. And then if I'm changing up one piece of that equation, if I'm changing up the 45 minutes to be my shutter speed, I have to change up the other 2 pieces to match. It's a little bit of trial and error. And I know, of course, we don't want to wait for a full 45 minutes exposure to see if we've done it right, but we have to judge it based on how much light we already have that evening.
Gotcha. All right. Well, we'll let you continue. We'll carry on with the Kara questions along the way.
Yeah, let me know. Thanks, guys. Okay, so number 4 brings me to having a tripod and thinking about VC, vibration compensation. So I know that I'm a little bit nuts, and about 10 years ago, I got a Gitzo Traveler tripod, which cost me a little over $1,000, but I absolutely love that tripod. And that was 10 years ago. And only this past year, in March, at the beginning of our new world here, was the first time that I actually sent it out to get cleaned and fixed because I had broken a little piece off of the head of the tripod. But that's lasted me 10 years. So no, I'm not telling you to go out and spend $1,000 on your tripod. But what I am telling you is a tripod is a necessity for night sky photography. It is not an accessory. It's not a piece that we can just say, I'll get a $10 tripod, this little piece of plastic, it'll be fine. If you get a $10 tripod, this little piece of plastic, and put your brand new $2,000 camera with your $1,000 lens on this setup, and it just crumbles and falls, and your camera gear goes down the hill, you're gonna be really sad. Armando and I have seen tripod legs fall, and it's not pretty. So what I am telling you is just to make sure that you have a tripod that is quality enough to hold your gear. Now, a tripod doesn't just help us as far as our steadiness goes, it also helps us with our composition. So I've had loads of people when I'm out on workshops tell me that they can just put their camera on the hood of their car because it'll stay steady and stable, or they can put it on a rock, they can put it somewhere stable, right? You can, not saying that it's not going to stay stable, it very well might, but you have totally lost control of your composition. So if the thing that you are trying to photograph is over there, and the only rock that's in sight that's steady is over there, you have now completely lost control of your composition, right? So a tripod is vital to our night sky work. The other piece of that is thinking about VC, vibration compensation. So VC is in the majority of Tamron lenses at this point, and it is a phenomenal tool to have when we are hand holding because it helps us hold our cameras for longer shutter speeds or for shorter shutter speeds than we normally would be able to when we are hand holding, right? So it's a motor inside of our lens that helps us stay steady. But when we are set up on a tripod and that VC is turned on, the motor is still working. So the motor itself is still hunting for vibration. It's still trying to stop vibrations. So sometimes if we leave that on, it'll kind of contradict itself and you'll actually see the motion of the VC motor working. So it'll cause a little bit of shake in our image, right? So we want to make sure that that is turned off when we are set up on our tripod and ready to go, all right? Next up, number 5, how do we focus at night? How are we going to focus our lens? What is the best way to go about doing this, right? So we can do this a couple of ways. If you're out there by yourself, photographing all alone, you can, of course, take your flashlight and focus on that tent in front of you, or you can take your flashlight and help focus on the rock in front of you. But a lot of times it doesn't come out that great. And it's a kind of a tough battle with your camera. So the easiest way that I've found does take a couple of minutes, but once you're set, you don't have to change it for the rest of the evening. So you are going to turn on the LCD screen on the back of your camera. You're going to turn on live view. You're going to turn off autofocus on your lens. So physically on the lens, turn off autofocus. On the back of your LCD screen, you're going to digitally zoom in, not manually with your lens, but digitally on the LCD screen. You're going to zoom in to the brightest star or planet or satellite, whatever little bright speck you see in the sky. You're going to zoom in digitally on that bright spot, and then manually with your lens, you will manually focus on that little bright spot. And you'll see it come into focus. It is noticeable. There's definitely a difference. You'll see a little blurred spot, and as you turn your focus ring, you will of course see it come into focus. Once you get it there, don't change, don't put your lens back to autofocus, keep it on manual focus. If you have a little piece of gaffer's tape, go ahead and tape down your lens. Then it will stay for the rest of the evening, and as you move around, you don't have to worry about your night sky coming out of focus. That's probably one of the easiest ways that I've found to do it. Yes, it does take a couple of minutes, so be patient with it, but once you have it set, you shouldn't have to change it for the rest of the evening. The other piece of equipment that is really helpful is having a shutter release. So the last thing we want to do is add motion to our frame. When we're waiting for a 30-second exposure, we don't want to have to wait just to see that we added added shutter, shake to our frame, right? So having a shutter release, whether that's external or digital, doesn't matter, but that way you are physically pressing the shutter out here and not physically touching your shutter, because every time you touch the shutter, you potentially add shake to that frame. If you don't have a shutter release, that's okay. You can use the timer inside of your camera. The timer, most SLRs have either a 2, a 3, a 5-second timer. You can even put it on 10 seconds if you want to wait the full 10 seconds. But what you're doing essentially is hitting the physical shutter, and then the camera will have that 2 or 3 or 5 seconds to settle down before it actually takes the image. And that way, again, we are preventing extra shake from our images. Number 6, light painting. So light painting is exactly what it sounds. We are physically taking some added light with a flashlight or an LED and adding light into our foreground, into our frame to create some more depth to our frame, to show more of our foreground, to show light where there naturally isn't any, right? So light painting, again, is one of those things that we have to be a little bit patient with, because no matter if you think you have come in at the same angle with the flashlight or added the same amount of time with the flashlights, no matter how many times you think you've done it exactly the same, it's usually not. So it does take a little bit of patience, but I do suggest giving light painting a try. So just so you have an example here of light painting, added light and no light. The image on the left was no additional light. The image on the right was using light painting. One of the flashlights that we've been using in the field a lot is the EagleTac, I think it's called the EagleTac 290 light bulb. I'll have to go take a look back at my notes. But I think it's the EagleTac 290 light bulb. It's not a cheap flashlight. I think it was like $80, but one of my other reps was out with me one evening and had that light with him, and it's a great flashlight for night light painting, mostly because it has a great control system, so you can control how much light you are outputting, and it has a very dim setting, because there are a lot of flashlights that just don't, that offer too much light actually. For like, you'd be surprised, you don't need a lot of added light. So it has a great control system, and it's also a very clean light. The other tough part with light painting, just with any regular flashlight, is a lot of times you can add some kind of unwanted colors and throw off your white balance. So if you're just using your everyday regular at home flashlight that's not a very clean light, it might add some really warm tones, or it might add some really cold tones depending on what light that is. So it's just something to keep an eye out for. There are definitely lights out there that are sold specifically for night sky photography to make sure that they are clean light. Number 7, composited images. So we talked about this actually just a couple of minutes ago in the image with the tent, but I was gonna talk about that just here for a second as well. So a lot of times when we are photographing the night sky, we have either a really dark foreground or too bright of a foreground, depending on how much moonlight we have out there that night. And we want to make sure that our Milky Way is the main subject to our frame. We want to make sure that the night sky really shines. No pun intended, that probably sounded really corny. No, it was not meant to be, but we want to make sure that our night sky is the shining star of our frame. So this is a composited image, which means that it's 2 images stacked on top of each other. So I exposed and focused specifically for the night sky in one image, and then exposed and focused specifically for the foreground in the next image. And that way they are then stacked later on, and I'm just kind of, there's many different ways you can do this, but in Photoshop you can literally just kind of crop out that bottom half, stick on the top half, and there you go, or vice versa. You can erase one half and stack the other. There's multiple ways to do it, but composited image are a great way to show the full experience of what you see that evening. Creating panos, another great way to really show off our night sky, and this is done with multiple vertical images. So this was, I think, 5 images. I'll show you in the next one here. Let's see. Yeah, or 4. I swear I had 5 in there. 4 images, but 4 vertically stacked images shot on set up on a tripod so that I make sure that I'm keeping the same nodal point the whole time, making sure that I'm staying on the same line. 4 images aligned together, of course, in Photoshop. That way I can see the full Milky Way from left to right over the arch. Star trails, we touched on this a little bit earlier as well, but this is using that same program that we talked about earlier, StarStax. So this is 1 frame. This was the span of 45 minutes, similar to one of the first images that I showed, but StarStax has a couple of other cool features in there where you can either show the star trail as it would be seen throughout 1 frame, or you can kind of give it this cool comet look, right? So if you want things to look a little bit different, you're trying to be a little bit artsy, this was 1 frame every 45 minutes, but I used their kind of comet feature so that you could kind of see where the star trail started and it would trail off towards the end. So you can get a little creative in there with StarStax. StarStax is offered for both Mac and PC, and I believe it is still a free app, so it's easy to download. Just make sure you download the right one for your computer. And you want to be using JPEGs, so it will not accept RAW files or TIFF files. So if you shoot in RAW, you have to then export them all to JPEGs, keep them in a separate folder, and upload that folder to StarStax. And then it will stack for you in order. But just make sure that you're not trying to upload any RAW files because it won't accept them. So if you've hit a wall with that before, like I did the first time I tried to use it, it is only JPEG files. Last but not least, number 10, composition. So I do big sections on composition and a lot of my other webinars because I do believe that composition is key. We need to be photographing with a purpose, regardless of what genre we are photographing with a purpose. Our viewer can really tell when we are putting in time and effort into our photographs. So we need to think about all the building blocks and all the pieces that go into our composition. And while this may sound like we are really overthinking it, well, why do I have to think about focal point and leading lines and all these pieces? A lot of times this happens subconsciously. We don't even notice it. But because we are so used to being behind our camera, it's really great to remind ourselves of all of these little pieces that can make a big difference in our image. So, of course, we start off with focal point. We start off with where the first part is that my viewer is automatically going to. Where is their eye going to jump to as soon as they see the frame? And we need to consciously think of that because while we are in the moment, while we are seeing something very, we are seeing the big scene, the grand scheme of things, they're only seeing what's in these four lines, right? They're only seeing what's in the square. So we need to make sure that we are directing them to our focal point. And how do we do that? A lot of times is through leading lines. So our leading lines are these guidelines that help move our viewer's eye through the frame. How are they going to get from left to right or top to bottom? How are they going to get to the focal point? Our leading lines are a great way to do that. And there's not any sort of rule saying that leading lines have to be, man-made like they are in this case, but they can be made from motion, they can be made from light, they can be made by multiple things. And there's also no rule saying that there has to be just one leading line. There can be many. There's no reason why there can't just be one, as long as they're directing all to the same place. We need to think about our perspective and how our viewer is going to understand that scene. How are they approaching it, right? So even by doing little things like getting closer to the ground, a lot of times we don't have to lie on the ground anymore because we have articulating screens on our cameras, so we can just point them up or hold our cameras up high and point them down. But our perspective can really change the way our viewer sees that scene. We can also help with angles as well. A lot of times, of course, this comes from our lenses and knowing what our lenses can do. So in this case, I have 3 images of the same scene. This is all shot at the St. Louis Arch of the same scene, but knowing that I have my 15 to 30 millimeter lens with me, I can approach this scene many different ways just with that one lens. So of course, the very first thing we do when we see the St. Louis Arch is we want to create the photograph with the full arch and the city underneath showing its full capacity, right? Showing the whole scene. But knowing that my 15 to 30 can get in even closer, I can move up close to that arch, still get a bit of the city underneath, and really elongate the full arm of that arch, right? I can then get even closer. And while, no, I don't have the city in the arch anymore, I can then completely change up the angle and change the perspective for what my viewer is going to see on that scene. Make it a little artistic, something different, something unique for myself, right? We don't always want to create the same image that others have created. Think outside the box just a little bit. We, of course, have to think about our rule of thirds when it comes to composition. So is using the rule of thirds in a particular scene working, or is it not working? And just because it is a rule, quote unquote, rule of thirds, I consider these more like guidelines. There's no hard set and fast rule to photography. You get to be the creative. You get to think outside of the box and decide what the best approach is to that image. What do I want my viewer to see in this frame, right? So if I'm breaking down the rule of thirds, what I'm doing is simply putting my focal point on a grid point. So I'm breaking it down in top, middle, and bottom third, left, middle, and right third, and I'm putting my focal point on one of those grid points where they meet, where they merge, so that it's not right in the center. Now, there have been plenty of images that I've created with my focal point dead center of my frame, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's whatever works for that image. And last but not least, we are thinking about scale. So scale, I think, is probably the piece of composition that gets forgotten the most. And I think the reason that is because we, as the photographer, we were there in that scene. We saw how big or how small that particular scene was. So when I'm at the Grand Canyon, I can see the full, vast, beautiful landscape of the Grand Canyon. But my viewer can't, right? They're not there with me. So I have to make sure they understand really the immensity of the situation, right? And I can do that by putting something that we naturally know how big or how small that thing is in my frame. I know naturally a human is, let's say, well, I'm 5 feet tall. I'm pretty short for a human, but I know naturally how on average height someone is. So I can then really understand the scale of these rocks, right? Or if I'm a macro photographer and I have a bug on the plant that I'm photographing, it can help my viewer really understand the size of that leaf and that plant, right? Sounds silly, but it makes a really big difference. And composition, when it comes to our night skies, is just as important. So regardless of what genre of photography you are really interested in, if you are photographing the night sky, don't forget that composition is still key. We need to make sure that we are creating a scene that our viewer understands and that they have that they are really thinking about, right? So with the Milky Way, don't forget how important our foreground is, how important our landscape is. And we want to make sure that we are giving our Milky Way a base. Where is it landing? So if it's earlier on in the year and I'm seeing it just straight across my sky, make sure my landscape in the foreground kind of mirrors that. If it's later on in the year and it is pointing straight down to Earth, give it a great landing point. Where is it going to settle? And how is my viewer's eye going to react in the frame, right? So I know that that is a lot of information, but I will leave you with this. Please be prepared for your photo shoots. Make sure you have those extra batteries. I know someone asked earlier about the length of battery life. Please bring extra batteries with you. If you forgot to charge one and you have another, great. But if you forgot to charge the one that you took with you, you have now lost your chance at photographing. Same thing with memory cards. I know that our memory cards now can hold a bazillion images on one card, but if you go out with one card, that card goes defective, or you forgot to format it from the last shoot, you've lost your chance. Tripod, we talked about how important a tripod is. Cable release, if you don't have a cable release, you can use your timer. I get hangry when I'm out late at night, so please bring extra water and snacks just to make sure that you are safe and comfortable. Last thing you want to really have to worry about while you're photographing is being hungry. Glow sticks. Glow sticks is one that I learned a few years ago from our wonderful boss, Ken Hubbard. We were out photographing the Great Sand Dunes National Park, and because it is a park that is very easy to get kind of, what's the word, like discombobulated, to get kind of confused on where you are, setting glow sticks up at the very beginning of where we walked in can help us find our way out. And then bring extra layers with you. Even if you live out in the desert like I do, it gets really cold at night. So I always bring extra gloves, warm hat, socks, everything I need to keep me comfortable late at night. So thank you so much for being with me today. You can find me on social media as Tamron Tech Erica, both on Facebook and Instagram. I will leave this page up. I do hope to hear from you. Please feel free to message. I know that Janet and Armando are out there with a bunch of questions, so I will bring them back in, see if there's anything. Hey, Janet.
Yes. Hello. Awesome. Oh my gosh. You definitely got people excited about venturing out into the night now.
Oh, good. You know, I talk fast. That's a lot of information. I tried to fit a lot in an hour. So
Yeah.
sorry for that.
And they definitely appreciate it. They said that there are things that they didn't think of. So thank you for that.
That's awesome. That makes me happy.
Okay, so lots of questions. So hopefully we can get to as many as we can during Q&A right now. Okay, so right off the bat, I'm gonna just hop into, I know a lot of people like went straight to looking for the StarStax app.
Okay.
I told them it's spelled STAX, right?
Yes, STARSTAX. Thank you for that.
Correct. Yep. So hopefully you guys found that. And let's see here, kind of do some, I guess, rapid fire questions, like some basics to get them out of the way. The light that you had when light painting, where did you position it? And usually where do you position it?
Good question. I never do it direct head on. I always come at it from the side. So I want to make sure that I'm giving it some sort of depth. If I put it straight up front, it's kind of like if any of you guys have shot weddings and you use just a giant flash right off the front of your camera, you just kind of smack everything with a bunch of light. I like to bring in my light painting from the side, so either the left or the right, add in a little bit of layers, basically.
Yeah, and any distortion when you combine the shots, especially on the wide angle zoom?
For distortion for like stacking.
I guess
for
stacking. I'm assuming it's stacking.
No, because if it was going to be on one, it would be on all of them. And fortunately, with our amazing 15-30, which I shoot with a lot, or if I'm on the Sony system with the 17-28, they are really great on the edges. So I don't have a problem with distortion. So no.
Perfect. For the star trails, where do you focus?
Okay. So still the same deal with focus when I was talking about manually focusing. So I still manually focus using the technique through the back of my LCD screen. I digitally zoom in, find the brightest star, manually focus on that star, and then I tape my lens down so I'm not worried about it for the rest of the night because it's still based on that same first image, right? So it's the same technique on focus.
Yeah, a couple people were asking about, you didn't by chance have that like a step-by-step list, did you, on that?
I don't, but I don't mind going through it real quick again.
Yeah, I think a couple people asked like to explain the manual focus and digital zoom steps once again, please.
Totally, yeah. I know I talk a little fast sometimes. So, okay. So, I am turning off the autofocus on my lens. That has to go off. We don't want our camera rotating. We want to turn our autofocus off. On the LCD screen, I'm turning on my live view so that I can view the scene through my LCD screen on the back of my camera. Now it's going to be dark. Obviously, you're not going to see a bunch. But since our camera is pointed in the general direction of the stars, we want to digitally zoom in to the brightest star or satellite or planet, but that's digitally zooming in. So just like when you push the plus button to zoom into a picture that you took to see if it's in focus, it's usually that same button. And that will help you digitally zoom in, not manually, but digitally through the LCD screen, zoom into that star. And then with your lens, manually focus on that star. So as you rotate the manual focus ring, you will see it come into focus, because originally it will start off as just a blob, and you'll see it kind of change as you focus. And then you leave it there. So you don't change up your focus for the rest of the evening. You simply tape it down. Don't turn your autofocus back on. Don't change any of those things. You can turn off your LCD screen. You don't have to look through that anymore. But now your camera should be in focus for the stars for the rest of the night.
And if people were asking, is there any particular tape that you're using?
Gaffer's tape.
Gaffer's tape, okay.
Yeah, some
And
form of gaffer's tape.
and quite a few people want to know the specific model of the flashlight that you're using for light painting.
Oh yeah, it's the, I want to say it's the Eagle TAC, like eagle like the bird, and then TAC, TAC, the 219 light bulb. Yeah, 219 flashlight.
219. Let me type that up real quick here for them. So it was the
Okay.
Eagle TAC, TAC.
Yep.
And 219.
219, yeah. And this is a wonderful recommendation from the powers of Mark Morris. For those of you who know our rep, Mark Morris, he's a gear junkie like most of us, and he found this light actually, and it's amazing. We've been using it for the last few years.
Yeah,
I
actually
don't think
someone
it was light, but it's pretty good.
yeah, someone in the chat also mentioned Mark Morris mentioned that.
Yes, yep,
So
that's where it came from, was him.
okay, so I just typed it up again. Hopefully everybody can see that. Okay, and then where was I now? I lost my place in questions here. Name a model flashlight where you got that. That's typed up.
And I think you can just get it on Amazon. I'm pretty sure that's where he got it.
Yeah, someone copy and pasted the link to
Oh,
Amazon.
perfect. Excellent. Thank you, whoever that is.
Any recommendations on photographing the moon?
Okay, great question. So I will personally admit that I generally like to shoot the stars more than I like shooting the moon. There's just totally a personal preference. But for shooting the moon, a lot of times I'm actually out there in between blue hour and dark sky. So we oftentimes think that we have to be in the darkest deep of night to photograph the moon. And that actually makes it a little bit tough, because generally you are exposing for this bright white orb that's in the middle of your frame. And if you're out there late at night and have a very dark sky, you now just have this bright white orb in the middle of your frame. So then you are shooting multiple frames, and you're combining them later on. But if you're shooting, if you shoot generally around blue hour or just after blue hour, late blue hour, you can get more depth in your frame, because you can actually get your foreground and your scene. But you are always exposing for the moon. You're always exposing for that bright spot in your frame, because if you overexpose that frame, you blow out those highlights. You blow out the highlights on the moon, which is the main subject of your frame. You're not going to be able to get them back. So I still always expose for the brightest spot, which would generally be the moon, in that frame.
And a lot of people are liking the light painting here. So going back to the flashlight, did you keep the flashlight on the entire time during exposure?
No, so this is where, when I was saying it takes a little bit of patience, generally you are not painting for the whole 30 seconds or the whole 15 seconds of your frame. Generally, you're just adding a little bit of a puff of light, for lack of a better word. I don't really know what the sound makes when light comes on, but you're just adding like a little bit of a blip of light. And it's something that takes quite a few images to actually get right, to get what you consider right in your frame as far as how much light is there. If you are really trying to expose with a whole lot of light, then yeah, maybe it is on for the whole time. But if you think of a full 30-second exposure, when you're photographing the stars, for instance, that's 30 seconds and you still don't see a whole ton of light usually. So if we leave our flashlight on one spot for 30 seconds, you're gonna have a giant hot spot in the middle of your frame. So you are painting like you're painting on a canvas. You are painting some light. You're coming in from the right or the left-hand side. You're taking your flashlight and you're painting in a little bit, and you're counting in your head, okay, that was for 1 second. That was for 2 seconds. That was for 3 seconds. And you're kind of trial and error to see what you like digitally when you look at the back of your camera. But it's
Yeah,
different
true.
every time.
Yeah. And an interesting question from Richard, like I guess to eliminate some camera noise, do you also take like dark images just to, I guess, maybe I'm assuming to stack them or just to have as backup or something? I'm not sure. He's asked, do you also take darks to eliminate any camera noise?
Good question. There are definitely times where I stack images. So if I am, let's see, trying to think of the other night when I was photographing, where I have, a really dark foreground. I don't want to, when I'm set up on a tripod, I know that I can leave my shutter open for as long as possible, right? So I don't have to boost up to 128,000 ISO because my foreground isn't moving and I'm not moving, right? So I can then do, maybe a minute exposure on my full foreground so that I'm creating enough light there, and then doing the exposure for my sky differently and stacking. So maybe that's what he's talking about by eliminating noise. You can shoot a little bit underexposed, so you can pull out some shadows later on. And with a lot of cameras now, because the sensors are so good, pulling out shadows, unless you're really pulling out a ton of shadows, doesn't usually create a whole lot of extra noise because the sensors are so good. But if you're, adding 5 stops of exposure by pulling out your shadows, then yeah, you're going to see a good bit of noise in there. So it's really dependent kind of on the situation.
Yeah. And also that one image with the tent, which I loved as well. Was it illuminated by a flash?
By a flash, no, but a light, yeah. So I light painted inside of my tent actually. So I shot probably 10 or so frames,
Wow.
just trying to get the light right for my foreground and for my tent. That particular image that I used, I was inside my tent. So I had to keep going in my tent, flashing some light, coming out, waiting for the exposure, checking it, not liking it, going back in my tent, trying it again.
Wow.
So it was trial and error
Oh
for
my
probably
God.
about 10 frames for the foreground. And I was just using my EagleTac, my flashlight, inside of my tent, and I actually had a diffuser on it. So I had a white piece of paper actually that I had tucked inside of my wallet, and I put that on the front of the flashlight because you really don't need a lot of light, and especially when it's being illuminated inside of a tent, you now have this giant bright orb in the middle of your
Yeah.
frame. You don't need as much light as you think you do, but just an added little blip of light helped really pop the light inside of the tent. And then as I was coming out of the tent, I added a little bit of light on my way out to the foreground that you see in front of the tent, because that was a bit dark. So there was 2 bits of light painting in one frame. So it looked like a fool in the middle of the desert, but nobody was there, so it didn't matter.
Right. So, and also speaking of, being out at night in the desert, someone did mention, do you have any worries or any security issues or safety concerns, any suggestions if someone's going out by themselves?
Oh, absolutely. I am all for being safe when you're out photographing by yourself. I try really hard to research the area that I'm going to be going in to make sure that I know what type of wildlife if I'm going out into. I follow a bunch of forums on Facebook and online to make sure that I know the time of year, if it's bear season or if there are a lot of coyotes in the area, things like that. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this on the air. I do carry knives with me when I'm out by myself because I just want to make sure that I'm safe and I'm protected. I'm also a female traveling alone a lot, so I want to make sure that I'm safe in that sense. I make sure that I have a Garmin InReach that I use when I camp a lot and when I hike a lot by myself, because it attaches to a satellite, so that if something goes wrong with me, I can hit basically like a 911 button on it, and it alerts my my person, whoever I've added as that, my what's it called, my emergency contact. My InReach will tell my emergency contact that I need help, so they know where I am. There's loads of different ways, but always tell somebody where you're going. If you can, give them exact locations. I know a lot of female travelers that live in vans, and they travel with their dogs. So if you have a dog with you, they're an amazing alert system. You're traveling in a place where there's bears, make sure you have bear canisters so that they can't be attracted by your food. I could go on for days. I am all about being safe at night.
Yeah, thanks for answering that, because there's a lot of females on here that ask, for advice on safety precautions going out at night. So yeah, definitely that's something to look into and be prepared for.
Definitely. Yeah, I hope that helps. I follow a lot of groups and forums, even just on Facebook. You can join. There's like an all women, all hiking Facebook group. There's one for SUV living, if you live in a camper or an SUV, for all women. That way you can kind of just ask the question, hey, I'm going out to this place at night. I just kind of want to make sure, does anybody know the area well, or should I be worried about animals, things like that. It doesn't hurt to ask. So.
I can't remember if I asked you this or not. Did you mention your tripod?
Oh yeah, I have a Gitzo Traveler tripod. I love that little thing. I bought it like 10 years ago. I can probably go get the model for you. I think it's a Series 1 Gitzo Traveler. I'm sure they don't make that particular model anymore. It was like 10, 11 years ago, but it's a great little tripod.
Okay, I typed it up for them.
Yeah, Gitzo Traveler Series 1. If you're not looking to spend, a giant chunk of change, I know that there's Benro makes a couple of really great traveler tripods now. Let's see. I would maybe look for something that is Arca Swiss. That way you can switch on and off to different tripods and different plates. So you don't have to worry about losing plates like I do all the time. I always forget they're on one camera and it's on another. So.
Okay, so filters. Do you use filters? Any recommendations, or just someone just asked, just anything you want to touch on about filters?
Yeah, oh totally. So if I'm shooting out during the day, a circular polarizer is always going to be a great go-to for my landscape photography, because it helps bring out those nice white puffy clouds and helps with a bit of contrast and helps my highlights, things like that. At night, I wouldn't necessarily use a polarizer, but there are all sorts of companies now that are coming out with astrophotography filters, specifically to help with dehaze and take away some of that, extra layer that we might have in there while we're photographing, bring out a bit of the colors. I think Breakthrough Photography is one of them. Let's see, what are they called? Polar Pro, I think, is another one, or Photo Pro. I said Polar Pro. Photo Pro is another one.
Polar Pro is one too, I believe.
Yeah,
that is a brand too, I believe.
Yeah,
that's funny. I think you should have just made a slide with all your gear.
I should have. I didn't even think of that.
You should have like affiliate links now.
I love that people are putting links in there. That's great. That's super helpful.
I know, but now you need to contact them and be like, hey, use my affiliate link. Let's see.
Right?
Oh,
yeah.
Right? Yeah. Oh, Larry asks, what are good settings for photography using the light of a full moon versus a new moon setting? Would you use like a rule of 500?
Yeah, so I'm still going to use my 500 rule, but I'm going to adjust my ISO first, because just like in any genre of photography, we want to keep as much detail on our sensor as possible. So I'm probably going to drop my ISO so that I'm not at 3200. I've had evenings with a lot of moonlight that I'm only at 800. And then after that, I'm going to adjust my shutter speed. So maybe I'm at 800 ISO and I still don't want that much light. Maybe I'm dropping my shutter speed then, and I'm only at 15 seconds or 20 seconds, depending on how much light is there. So that's usually the order I go in. I start by dropping my ISO, then I drop my shutter speed, and if I need to, then I'm even dropping my aperture.
Got it. And get just one last question in, and all the others that we didn't get to, feel free to, gosh, definitely follow Erica on her Instagram. She has a great feed there. And any questions, any other questions you may have for her, definitely feel free to reach out to her on her social handles. And also, one quick question, some basic questions, rapid fire, quickly, your backpack, any brand or any specific?
Yes. So I kind of made a backpack because I
Oh.
was uncomfortable with a lot of the backpacks that I was wearing. But a great outdoor backpack that's specific for cameras is by Atlas, ATLAS, Atlas. They make a great pack. I love Think Tank gear, absolutely love Think Tank gear. But I use them mostly for my like shoulder bags or for my city bags. So for my actual hiking bag, I have just a bag from REI. It's called the REI Trail 40. And it opens fully from the front so I can access anything, but it has clips for safety. I put in these, what are they called? Inserts made by, oh man, yeah, who they're made by. I'm drawing a blank, but camera inserts basically that allow me to change up the modular system that's
Like
inside
GoPro?
my bag. No, it's begins with an F. F-stop gear. F-stop gear.
Oh,
There it is.
okay.
I think Tenba makes them as well, but they're the square modular inserts, and I just
Oh,
slide
yeah.
them right into my
I
backpack.
think a lot of camera bags are doing those now anyway. So,
Oh, good.
yeah. I'm sure if you guys buy any of the bags, a lot of them make them now. And any recommendations for weighing down any recommended techniques for weighing tripod down for wind protection without having to carry extra weight when hiking to a location?
Gotcha. So I then use whatever I have on me. So I'll take off my tripod has a clip on the underneath, right? So I'll take off my backpack and put stuff, any of my stuff that I have, or literally even rocks that are around, I put them inside my backpack so that it just hooks onto the under hook of my tripod, the middle column, and holds it down. I've definitely done that.
Good to know.
I know. It's like MacGyver when you're out in the woods. You got to figure it out.
Oh, yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. Oh my gosh, I really loved your lots of compliments here. Fabulous program tonight by Roger. Great presentation, and everybody's loving it. So definitely feel free to hit up Erica on her social handles. Definitely follow her feed. It's awesome.
Thanks for being
Yeah.
a great host, Janet. You always field so many awesome questions. I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you. No, I was kidding. All right.
Bye.
So again, if you have if you had any audio or video issues, don't worry. You will get a follow-up link. And I believe I sent out a bunch to some already that didn't get the link from last week. I emailed you during this presentation. And as always, thank you, Armando, in the background for helping with all the questions.
Thanks, Mondo.
Welcome.
We lost you for a minute there, but that's okay.
I know, yeah, I had some power issues here. As you can see, I'm in the
Yes.
dark.
Oh, man.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a good night, and we will see you soon.
Thanks,
right.
guys. Bye.
See you next time.
Bye.